If you haven't heard about Anchor, it is the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. Number one, it's free. There's a creation tool that allows you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Now, Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so you can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many, many more. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. anchor.fm to get started today. Now, let's get to the broadcast. In today's broadcast, I want to talk about 3 tips for overcoming employment barriers. Now, sometimes you have a good resume and you can get the interview, but it's always good to be confident in the answers that you give during the interview. Now, in this podcast, I'm going to give you 3 tips to overcoming employment barriers that cloud your ability to land the job. It could be the possibility of being an ex-offender, your background, problems with homelessness, being fired, gaps in employment, or drug and alcohol abuse. But whatever the issue is, if you grab a paper and pen, take a few notes and work on these 3 tips, you will be able to identify and overcome these barriers. Now, in the future, we're going to do a full webinar on this particular topic. I believe that people really need to know exactly how to do it. So that'll be in a future. You can just stay tuned and we will give you the information when that is available. So tip number 1 to overcoming employment barriers is to identify the questions and the issues that you need to address. What is my issue? Was I fired from my last job? What are the issues? You have to identify those issues, and you're going to make a list of those issues. Now, if you have any questions relating to the topic, please leave a message by simply clicking on the message button, and I'll be able to do my best to answer, possibly during another podcast or even during the webinar. Now, tip number 2 to overcoming the employment barriers is to learn 3 situations in your own life that require a good answer and create a personalized answer for each. You have to have whatever issue that you have to identify that type of issue, and then you're going to create an answer that goes along with it. It can be very easy to say, just do this, but there is a way. There's words that you use. There's you don't want to be too graphic. You don't want to say, well, so-and-so was killed. They just had an untimely death, or that may have affected you or your employment status, or maybe they just changed status and downsized on your job and you lost your job. Well, you still need to be able to answer those questions just in case an employer decides to ask. Some questions are off limits, but just in case, you want to be prepared. Number 3 to overcoming these barriers is have that good answer. Practice, practice, practice. Learn to effectively check on how you are doing by practicing your answers. Don't wait until you get ready to have the interview to go over the answer that you've crafted. And like I mentioned before, we're going to do a full webinar on that in the future. And if you're listening to this podcast, there may be a link on this podcast or on a future podcast if we've already had the webinar. I think it's very important for people to know how to answer the tough questions that an employer might ask based on your background or based on something that may have happened in your life. So thank you for tuning in. This is My Careers Plus. I'm Diane, and so thank you so much for tuning in. If you'd like to support our broadcast, just click on the button there in our link, and we would be most thankful for anything that you can do to share this broadcast with others as well. So you have a great one.